Shall we start with you, Ariane?
Okay, so in the United States and North America, the big issue is that there are all these organizations, these LGBTQ plus organizations that are phenomenally wealthy. We're talking things like $25 million budgets to organizations like the Trevor Project, and that doesn't even cover the fact that Mackenzie Scott alone gave them $45 million in 2025, and that's just one organization. There's also HRC, we have GLAAD, plus we have sort of allied groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center, and they are feeding a narrative to particularly Democratic politicians and to the left-wing media and to any sort of grassroots Democrat activist groups that you are a terrible person if you do not support, for example, childhood medical transition. You're a terrible person if you don't support the whole TQ+, if you don't support the whole queer theory thing. And this is an enormous obstacle to overcome simply because the resources they have at their disposal and the connections they have at their disposal. So to make things worse, there's also the issue of free speech. So I've spoken to a colleague from LGB Alliance Canada who says that one of the biggest issues in their country is threats to free speech through hate speech laws, which are going to criminalize things like possibly like questioning people's pronouns or gender identity. And as much as I'd like to say that the US, that the First Amendment protects us, I'm from California. There are now 2 bills in the California legislature, one of which would require hate speech training for all California employees with businesses of 5 or more employees, and another one that would mandate hate speech training for all elected officials. So we have a really big fight on our hands, and so we have to be very judicious with the funds we have at our disposal. And one of the most important things is we have social groups. We have online social groups on Zoom, and we get people from all over the country, and actually even the world. Anyone from anywhere in the world can come. And we have like one for men, one for women, one mixed sex group, plus some other groups. And we come together, and I've heard so many people, so many LGBT people come to us and say, this is the only group that they know of where they can freely speak of these issues. And that's actually very important, is the community building aspect. The other thing too is we work with groups that are fighting the same battles as we are. And this is something that's largely done on a grassroots level. So I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, where this whole thing started, and I'm part of a terrific women's group called San Francisco Turf Central. And we're a closely related group called Women Are Real, and we fight bad bills in the California legislature. I've been to Sacramento. We have people testify in Sacramento. Anyone in California can go give a 30-second speech, just say their name and their opinion on a bill. And also, groups like Our Duty, Erin Friday, who's a parents group. She's a huge force in California politics. And then you have regional groups in other parts of the countries. You have New York Roar, you have Pennsylvania for sex-based rights, there's a Massachusetts for sex-based rights, also the LGBT Courage Coalition. So we have, basically, this is actually the most fun thing about it, is meeting all these terrific people from all these various groups and working together on a grassroots level. And so I'm actually cautiously optimistic.
Great. That's amazing. How's in Colombia? Tell us about it.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm a little nervous.
Bend the microphone over.
What was that?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So in Colombia, gender identity has advanced very rapidly, but it's not like we passed any laws through Congress. It's been mostly through rulings by our constitutional court. And these have gradually enshrined gender identity in law. What's distinctive about Colombia is that we might look progressive on paper, like through these same rulings, we decriminalize abortion and legalize same-sex marriage and same-sex adoption. But all this coexists with very high levels of violence towards LGBT people, especially gay men who are trans-identified in the context of prostitution. So this violence is very real, and we completely acknowledge it. But what happens is it prevents people from wanting to talk about these issues. So if you raise concerns about pediatric gender medicine, or if you talk about how sexual orientation is different from gender identity, you get accused of, further marginalizing this group of people and contributing to their violence. So it's very difficult, it gets weaponized. The situation with gay groups who fought for gay marriage is that they have all been completely captured. It's all gender now. And we're the only ones saying the truth. I wanted to say, these groups are affiliated with all these bigger LGBT international networks like ILGA. They also receive funding from the European Union. In Colombia, it's not common for people to donate. We're a very poor country, so they all rely on these international funds. And what we do basically to rebuild LGB movement and community is, first of all, we exist, so we provide a space for people to come to us and vent or just say their piece. But we've been submitting public comments whenever Congress has to try to pass legislatively self-ID or these so-called trans-inclusive conversion therapy bills. And we've worked with women's groups to, we've made one video providing our analysis on these bills. But yeah, we mostly just say the truth, and that's what we do.
Thank you, Jose. Yeah, I think that's the most important thing, and I hope people from here also realize that just being here and just existing and telling this truth is already a lot. So why don't we go further and to Europe, Bulgaria? How's it there? How's in Bulgaria? Yeah.
So, the most important thing is that almost 2 years ago, Bulgarian Constitutional Court made a big decision to state the sex as only biological and banned any transition at all. The problem is that made the gender ideology organizations far more aggressive. And their actions, it's a very big chain of actions, led to a new homophobic law, which banned discussions about homosexuality with minors or in schools at all. The problem in Bulgaria about the gender critical movement is that the other gender critical organizations are also homophobic, because the mindset in Bulgaria is like it's like a package deal. You should support all the 10,000 letters, or you should be against everything. And everything started, I think, somewhere around 2015. I think it's the rise of the gender ideology in Bulgaria, and all the sociological organizations which made some surveys around Bulgaria stated that the acceptance of homosexuality at all in Bulgaria has dropped since the rise of the gender identity ideology. Yeah, it's very obvious for people here, but the situation in Bulgaria is so that people, there are people. It's the majority of people who are homophobic at all, and as an example, there was in a survey there were questions about, do you want to have a gay colleague in work, and something like I don't remember the right number, but 87% or something like that said no, just terrifying. And before that, I think the last one was in 2010, before the gender ideology rise, only 40-ish% were no. So it's just a very, very obvious worsening of everything. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. Nick, could you tell us about Taiwan?
Okay, hope my Asian English wouldn't disappoint you all. Well, in Taiwan, after the Marriage Equality Act passed in 2019, we moved, unfortunately, towards gender ideology as well. The first trans-themed parade, it was a full-out trans parade, was held in the very same year, 2019, before, on the eve of the Pride parade itself. We thought it was like, hey, maybe it's just for the small group of people whatsoever. And since the following day, Taipei Pride parade is always on a Saturday, in October. So we thought, hey, it should be just a small activity. But and of course we were all busy celebrating being the first Asian country legalizing same-sex marriage, so we didn't really pay attention to it. But it turns out that every single legacy LGBT organization from that day on slowly became LGBTQ organization, all of that legacy, and including the legacy women's rights organizations have fallen as well. Just similar to like we've all heard earlier during the keynote, it's like, hey, you cannot be a feminist if you do not support trans rights. It's the same playbook, exactly the same playbook as we see in UK or the other countries. The current status quo is that a Taiwanese citizen, if he or she is applying to change his or her legal sex marker, is to have 2 diagnoses of gender identity disorder or gender dysphoria, DSM-5, and have undergone removal of sex organs, of course. And then one of the groups leading the fight for marriage equality suddenly overnight became the champion of trans rights. And they have since started what we call litigation canon, similar to Colombia, suing the Ministry of Interior, saying that, hey, you have to let trans-identified individuals change sex marker without surgery, or some in the future without any diagnosis, or else it's unconstitutional, it's a breach of human rights, so on and so forth. And unfortunately, the judge hearing these cases are surprisingly similar to California. They are pretty much all woke now. So as of this very moment, there are at least 7 Taiwanese citizens with their legal sex marker different from their biological sex. And that is the situation now. There hasn't been a blanket bill or legislation taking place since we're pretty much a two-party system. So no single party will risk losing their next election to this on the bright side. But these organizations will still continue to file lawsuits one by one. I mentioned legacy LGBT organizations that have all turned into alphabetical soups, and including the women's organizations, and pushing for gender identity in all curriculums, pushing the legalization of full self-ID sooner or later. Even the largest gay organization that used to champion gay rights are now handing out pronoun stickers to trans-identified people. Pretty much all the focus was since moved to gender ideology, and LGBT was pretty much silent or erased from the discussion. And of course we had to retaliate. So the most important part is that we got in touch with international organizations. We saw LGBT doing here in the UK, and we and some very brave lesbian and bi women and gay and bi men started LGBT Alliance Taiwan, and we started pushing back. Well, the experience might be very different from the United States, whereas we're tiny. We're less than the size of Lake Michigan. Taiwan is tiny, but we're 23 million people. Also, Taiwan's first gender-critical women's organization was formed several years ago, fighting for exclusively for women's sex-based rights, and they have lesbian and bi women as members as well, and we work also closely with them, again, pushing back against gender ideology and curriculums and so on and so forth. And they successfully pushed back against a discrimination bill that would criminalize discrimination based on gender identity. So we're starting to push back and work little by little. And sooner or later, we hope that there will be more to come, working with international organizations.
Yes, in general, it's good to be gay in Sweden, I would say, at least compared to some of these other countries. But yeah, the attitudes towards homosexuality has improved a lot since the 80s and 90s when I grew up. But now, recent polls around among young people, they show that the attitudes are becoming more negative again. And it also depends a lot on where you grew up in Sweden. So if you are within a religious community or within honor culture, it's quite a different story. So Sweden was the first country in the world to allow people to change their legal sex in 1972. And this is very early compared to gay rights. So homosexuality was decriminalized in 1944, but we weren't depathologized until 79, so after the right to change legal sex was introduced. We got civil partnership rights in 95, adoption in 2003, and marriage in 2009. Then this gender recognition law was changed in 2024. So the new law removed the requirement to have a diagnosis in order to change your legal sex, and it also lowered the age limit from 18 to 16. The debate around this law was centered around the impacts on young people, and especially the rising in young women identifying as trans and getting gender identity disorder diagnosis. But the issue about men in women's prisons and in women's sports was also on the agenda. So we are very lucky to have an old school feminist organization in Sweden called the Swedish Women's Lobby, who debated against self-ID. So that was good for us, I would say, in Sweden. This law was passed under a right-wing government. It was pushed very hard by the current prime minister from the right-wing government, but also by the previous social democrat government. And despite a lot of disagreement among party members, both in the moderate and social democratic party. So then this Christmas, actually, just 6 months after the law was passed, the government suddenly announced that they would review it. Why? Because there were two high-profile murder cases where trans-identified men were murderers. And the Minister of Justice then wrote on Instagram that biological men should never be placed in women's prisons. This is quite ironic, since men have likely been placed in women's prisons since 1972. And also this issue was raised during the debate around the law, but then it was disregarded. Well, Sweden has a strong consensus culture, so we had some breakthroughs in the debate recently, but gender identity ideology is still the mainstream narrative, and it's embraced by most public bodies. And our major LGBTQ organization, RFSL, they have gone down a similar path as Stonewall in the UK. So they characterize all debate around trans issues as hateful. We started LHB-förbundet, LGB Alliance Sweden, in 2022, I mean. So we are democratic membership organizations that is run by and for the members. And we write public consultations and critical reviews of materials that come out, and We participate in debates. And also we arrange social activities for the members. And just as other people in this panel talked about, I think this is a very important part, because many of our members, they have stories to tell about feeling very isolated and not daring to speak their minds within the LGBTQ movement, and also being harshly silenced when they try to speak their minds. So we are trying to create a LGB community where people can think freely and speak freely.
So as you see, very different contexts, very different situations, but kind of like the same challenges in very different ways. I would like to go back to Nick. You mentioned same-sex marriage was recently legalized, yet the acceptance, the social acceptance of homosexuality is still very low. Has the debate shifted already towards gender identity, or has it done it in the same way as it happened in Western societies, in Western countries?
Well, one of the parts is that even before our Marriage Equality Act passed, polls have shown that the support for same-sex marriage or lesbian and gays were not unanimous or even hitting the 50% mark. And so it's easy once, like many countries like Bulgaria, once gender ideology is included in the equation, it's very easy to let the whole thing go down the drain. Asian countries where gender stereotypes are prevalent provides one of the greatest conditions for homophobia fueled by gender ideology to thrive. A great example is the Chinese-speaking world, China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, so on and so forth. Feminine men and masculine women are already bullied or ridiculed by mainstream society. Even in a lesbian relationship, it is classical in Taiwanese lesbians to have a more masculine one or a less masculine, more feminine one. You see, well, that somehow putting the heterosexual framework in the lesbian relationship again. And of course, gender ideology showing up further worsen the situation. I think many of you or some on the panel today have seen a few days before the conference there is a huge on X on Twitter, there was a post on a huge 5-story high billboard in southern Taiwan on mastectomy. That is I repeat, that's a 5-story high billboard and a commercial saying that, hey, we can remove your breasts for whatever, like 600, starting just 600 pounds or something like that. You can imagine how insane that is. So even previously, in a lesbian relationship, a heterosexual framework still kind of existed. Breast binders in Taiwan, for example, are not medical devices, and we cannot ban them from, for example, in the United States, they have banned it in Walmart, I think, after Trump administration, but in Taiwan, it's very easily, you can get on eBay or the eBay equivalent of Taiwan and get it very cheaply. So breast binding is a thing. And now it's gotten worse because it was a lesbian relationship, but now since same-sex support is dropping, then now it's hey, you don't have to be a lesbian anymore, just transition. And as the transition, the difficulty to transition drops day by day, this will only go from bad to worse, even though maybe it's not full transition or whatsoever. And Taiwan is a country with universal health care, so it's not that difficult to get doctors' endorsements. We don't use the NHS using a counselor system that you only need a 2-week notice or 2-hour appointment. No, we have to go through a medical doctor, but it's not difficult to get estrogen or different hormones to start an HRT, even though surgery in Taiwan is still a long way away. So yes, it does worsen the situation, not to mention that everything's bundled together. So now when anything bad happens to trans-related news is, oh, another disgusting gay. Of course it's not a gay-related issue, but yes, it's got worse. It's being more difficult for LGBT, especially the youth.
I'd like to now talk to you, Basil. You mentioned, the Constitutional Court said sex is biological, which is true and which is amazing for us because our sexualities are based on that fact that sex is biological. And then they put together sexual orientation and also gender identity. Is this merging of those, does it make it easier in the context of Bulgaria to advocate for LGBT rights? Or is it harder that they just merge sexual orientation and gender identity?
Yeah, as I mentioned, this merging has done a lot of damage. And I think the first thing we should do is to do the separation in minds of the people.
Yeah.
So this will lead to everything else. Because we try to work with other gender critical organizations, it won't work because the theories and methodologies of them are not the things that we want. As an example, one of the gender critical NGOs told on a conference which we were not part of, you cannot change sex because God forbids it. No, you cannot change sex because you cannot biologically change your sex. And as I said, the most important thing is to do the separation in the minds of people to understand that LGB is something very, very, very different than the other letters. And this will lead to everything other.
Thank you, Vasila. Okay, courts have made that clear in Bulgaria, and I think, as you said, courts have also played a huge role in expanding gender identity protections in Colombia, right? Has that affected also public debate? And for example, has that affected how people approach medical transition of youth, children? Or is there any resistance to talk about it in Colombia?
Yes, definitely. So I talked previously about these court rulings. I think in the UK you have a similar situation, but in Colombia it's the other way around. So we have terrible court rulings, and if you challenge them, people accuse you of going against the court. And it's hard sometimes for politicians also to come out against them because they don't want to get accused of going against the court. They say it's settled law. These are already established rights. So how that affects public discussion is, it just shuts down any attempt at conversation. So we've had self-ID since 2015. That was no diagnosis, no surgery. And then in 2021, it was elevated to a fundamental right. So you have a fundamental right to a gender identity. And since then, we've just slowly, it's gotten more and more absurd. So now you can have an X as your sex marker, you can have an NB for non-binary as your sex, and you can have a T as your sex. So we're really captured, it's really bad. And just saying the word gender ideology, I think in any Spanish-speaking context, it's hard because the activists have been really effective at getting people to believe that there's no such thing as gender ideology. It's a thing made up by the right, by the Christians or the Catholics, and it's just an attempt at rolling back gay rights or abortion or sex education. It's all the same. It's just a boogeyman, right? It's scary. I want to talk about two examples of how captured the media is in Colombia. No debate is really where we're at. There's no debate in the media. And so proof of that is we had a recent high-profile detransitioner lawsuit, and that was only covered by one news magazine, but it was pretty much total silence. And it was huge because it was the first one, I believe, in Latin America. And it was easier to find coverage by people outside Colombia than inside Colombia. And another example is there was an interview with a detransitioner that was going kind of viral. And the response was just a complete online pile on the woman, the podcaster. It was for a podcast. And they were demanding her to delete the episode, you know, to reparate the harm and all these things. So the response is really disproportionate. They really are bullies, and they have a tight grip on the national conversation. So that's where we're at. Let me see if I'm forgetting anything. Oh yeah, and then coverage of things like the CAS review or the HHS report from the USA, or even the recent Finnish study. Nothing, silence. But they will occasionally cover, like, you know how sometimes this random study pops up supporting gender affirming care. They'll cover that and they'll publish that. But yeah, it's really bad.
Yeah. Something that's probably similar in the US is how heated is the debate about youth transition, right? How has that affected actually same-sex attracted youth in the US? Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to emphasize that this whole youth transition thing has been going on longer than a lot of people think. I'm 37. When I went to high school around 2005, there was already a boy in my high school who had transitioned. Not a gay boy, but a boy who transitioned. And our Gay Street Alliance turned into gender and sexuality awareness, and this was in 2005. In most of the rest of the country, it was more like 2015 where stuff like that was happening. And I also saw this in college. I went to Smith, which is a women's college that's famous for lesbians, and there were definitely women, including lesbian students, transitioning. So in terms of the modern debate, it's very hard in the US because we're such a big country with all sorts of political polarization on this issue. Most red states, almost all red states, have effectively banned pediatric transition. And the response from blue states is, let's become a sanctuary state. So we're not going to comply with, so if someone from a red state comes to a blue state to get the pediatric transition, the blue state has an official policy of refusing to comply with out-of-state laws, and it's getting worse because there's another bill in the California legislature, AB 1930, which would also make effectively block complying with subpoenas from out of state, so including from child custody courts. So if you're from a red state and you have a legal custody over your child, and you have a legal child custody order in your red state, and you do not want your child to transition, but the other parent takes that child to California to transition, this bill will say you have to notify the Attorney General. The Attorney General can block the subpoena, and in some cases can even hand it over to a California family court, which would be against federal anti-kidnapping laws. So that's what has made things difficult. And you know what? There have been some pediatric clinics that have closed down because of Trump's executive orders. One that has not closed down, I know, is Kaiser Oakland. The Oakland City Council explicitly told them they cannot close down their pediatric transition clinic. And I've seen Kaiser San Francisco, they go to gay pride parades and they have booths where they advertise their medical transition. So that's the state in the US.
It is crazy. Going a bit north and also staying in this topic about youth medical transition, gender affirming care, we've seen in Nordic countries the scrutiny of this quote-unquote medicine is growing, right? Like we have, as also mentioned, this last finished review, and we have all sort of information saying that this is kind of like ineffective. It's not proving what they claim. Is this debate visible in Sweden? Are people talking about this scrutiny of the quote-unquote gender medicine? And is it harder or easier to kind of like have safe warden for children? Like, is it easier there?
Well, the Swedish debate around trans and gender medicine started in 2019 with a TV documentary called The Trans Train and the Teenage Girls. This documentary was about the increase in teenage girls getting gender identity disorder diagnosis and also medical treatments. So they interviewed the transitioners and worried parents. And of course the major LGBTQ and the trans organizations, they criticized this documentary very harshly and called it transphobic. But still, this documentary spiked some public debate. And then 2 years later, 2021, 3 years later, it was followed by another documentary called The Trans Kids. And in that documentary, they showed that Swedish children had been medically harmed by puberty blockers. After this, in let's see, 2022, the Swedish clinical guidelines were changed so that puberty blockers were no longer the recommended treatment for gender identity disorder in children. So internationally, it's often stated or believed that Sweden has banned puberty blockers, but this is not true. These guidelines are not recommended puberty blockers, but they are not binding. So, and they also state that you can prescribe puberty blockers within studies and in special cases. And the gender clinics, they decide themselves which are the special cases. And it doesn't either say in the guidelines what type of studies should be conducted. So for example, in Stockholm, in Karolinska, the large gender clinic there, they will follow up their patients until the age of 21, and that's their study. So that's, of course, it's better than nothing, of course, but it's not a randomized clinical control study. So, if we look at statistics, then the prescription of puberty blockers has decreased for girls in Sweden since the peak in 2018 and 19, but instead it increased for the boys. And cross-sex hormones, that has also decreased for girls under 18, but increased for boys, and also increased for young adults of both sexes. So the trend is that the boys are catching up now, and also a lot of young adults are transitioning. The public debate is, of course, very polarized. So the gender clinics and the LGBT and trans organizations, they are saying that, yeah, these treatments are life-saving. Almost no one gets the treatments. It's very restrictive, and no one is rushed into it. And then on the other side of the debate, we have other medical professionals saying that there is no evidence for that the harm is, or that these treatments do more good than harm. So I think we've come to a point in the debate where both left-wing and right-wing newspapers do publish opinion pieces from both sides. So this is good, but the other side is not responding to our arguments, and they are trying very hard to discredit us by placing us all under a big anti-gender umbrella together with Trump and Orban. So that's the state of the debate in Sweden, I would say.
Wow, thank you very much. So as you can see, the fight for LGBT rights is at different stages in different parts of the world. And we are still facing a lot of challenges, but I'm sure and I'm positive and quite optimistic, as Kate said in the introduction, that we will change things, and we are already doing it. Proof of that is the emerging number, the growing number of LGBT groups emerging everywhere. We receive emails from countries around the world, Africa, South America, some I think South Asia as well, maybe. So it's clear that this is just not a matter of the West. Everywhere people are fighting this, and yeah, we're very optimistic. We're very happy also to be part of this, and we're also interested in your opinion and your questions. So let's open the floor to you. And yeah, I already see some hands raised. So yes, please.
I'm from the USA. My
Yeah.
name is Madison, and I'm active with the Guide Voices group on Twitter, and we meet regularly. FICA came and did a talk with us, suggested that maybe all the LGB groups from the international coalition, if maybe we could make a concerted effort and meet somewhere, let's say Geneva, Switzerland, and we create something to go against the Yoga Carta principles.
Yes.
And we come, the same-sex attracted people, call it the Geneva principles, and then we create what we're putting forward for same-sex attracted people, so that we can go against the Yoga Carta principles and show how they are directly in conflict. And I think if we do that, we have an official document like Yoga Carta principles,
Yeah.
but it's specifically for lesbians, gays, and bisexuals.
Wow.
I think that we could do something more
Mhm.
on an international legislative field.
Yes.
I really believe this is the next step we have to take, so we can hit it all from an international level, because
Yeah.
that's what they
That's
did.
a great idea. Thank you very much.
I never heard of these principles. Can you just explain what they are?
So the other principles was it 2002, so they met in Bali, Indonesia, and pushed through this idea of what they wanted for all the human rights. They put them under human rights, and that's where they brought in the T internationally, and then what they did is top-down organizations across the world, and that's how they co-opted every single lesbian, gay, bisexual organization.
And not only those, like all international organizations, they just quote the Yoga Carta principles
Yeah.
as if this is common law and everyone should acknowledge that, and yeah.
That's how
that's-
IGLA then is their spin-off from Yoga Carta
Yeah.
principles. The IGLA became a worldwide organization pushing those principles. And if you look in every country, like it's really big in Canada,
Mhm.
to push through all the educational materials that are happening in schools and universities. So,
Something that I really want to emphasize is that those principles are based on zero evidence. They just got together a bunch of people with no clear expertise or on anything, and just decided this is somehow everywhere. There are more questions. So yes, yeah, Kate, do you want?
On gay rights worldwide. My name is Ariane Geringer, and I am the international liaison for LGB Alliance USA. And as you know, as we've been making a lot of announcements about, LGB International launched last year. We currently have 21 chapters and growing. And earlier today, we had a panel with representatives from LGB International chapters from 5 countries spanning 4 continents. However, this panel will focus on LGB rights in countries and geographic regions that are not currently represented by LGB International. And our first panelist is Renato Sabatini, who is the former Secretary General and Executive Director of ILGA, which is now the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Association, but was formerly just the International Lesbian and Gay Association. And ILGA is an organization that plays a crucial role in pushing for the LGBTQ+ rights around the world, including in the developing world. And we also have panelists from various countries from Africa and South Asia who are going to talk about their experiences growing up as an LGB person in their respective country and status of LGB rights in their country. And this includes Hizar over here, a gay man from Pakistan who now lives in the UK, And joining us virtually is Sarah over here from Bangladesh. She is a bisexual woman now living in the USA. And on my right is Teresa. She's a lesbian asylum seeker from Mozambique who's currently living in the UK. And so, just reiterating, no videos, no photography for all of you who just trickled in. And I think we'll start with you, Renato. Briefly tell us about your role in ILGA and how it is that you came to see that ILGA was straying from its original mission of helping LGBT people worldwide.
Thanks, Ariane. First of all, thanks to LGB International for inviting me. I'm very pleased to hear. And so my name is Renato Sabadini. My pronouns are I, me, and mine, as everyone else's. But so when you will report what I said here, you will say, I said that, and I meant me. So jokes apart, so I was the executive, first the co-secretary general of ILGA from 2008 to 2013, and my main achievement in that time was basically to orchestrate the lobbying campaign to the UN ECOSOC Council so that ILGA reobtained its UN observer status that it lost in 1992. And then as executive director from 2014 to 2018, first of all, I moved the headquarters of the organization from Brussels to Geneva because, of course, the idea was to work more and more with the Human Rights Council. So I will not read, sorry, Ariane, what I wrote for this part because this morning were said a few things that I think bear a little bit of correction. Whenever a new movement is born out of an old one, whenever there is a sort of schism, so to speak, there is always, I think, the risk of throwing away the baby with the bathwater. So, and I think if you're old like me, many of you probably were active in an ILGA member organization back in the days. I don't think ILGA was the driver of this collective hysteria that took us in the second decade of the millennium. But ILGA was a vast pond at the international level and certainly a very fertile ground for any new virus or microbe that could, replicate itself and diffuse itself. But I think, so I don't want here to preach to the choir because I think it wouldn't be useful. And Kurt knows that I usually always refrain from preaching to the choir, but rather I want to set the record straight for LGB, take your pick. So, first of all, Yogyakarta principles. They were born out for a specific reason in 2006. And the problem of making advocacy for gay and lesbian rights at the UN was that sexual orientation was not mentioned in the UN Human Rights Declaration. Okay, so there was no official document of the UN that mentioned gays and lesbians. So these people, and not all of them were people who didn't know what they were talking about. I would like to remind you that one of your trustees, Professor Robert Wintermute, was one of those who wrote and drafted the first version of the Yogyakarta Principles, that mainly at the time were about sexual orientation and were a very useful instrument at the later stages to provide friendly states with something legal to say vis-a-vis other states that were very unwilling at the UN level to give any recognition to gays and lesbians. I think the problem started, and Robert Wintermute would be the perfect person to talk about this, when there was a revision of the Yogyakarta Principle 10 years later, in 2016, when there was the so-called Yogyakarta plus 10 plus, okay, because that is when gender identity became the main focus of the new document. So I would say if you want to build a new document of some in this sense, then you should probably invite Robert to see what should be changed and what should not be changed. A lot of work was done by ILGA in the first decade of the millennium in favor, of and the main beneficiaries were gays and lesbians around the world. I don't know the utility of a new document today, because to be fair, if you watch like me the geopolitical situation internationally, the UN is in a very deep crisis. I'm not sure they would, for the time being, give much of a thought about LGB rights or any other kind of rights. I'm not even sure if the UN will survive as it is. Sorry, you see. Just one more thing, sorry. So I don't know, we live in very strange times. Someone this morning also mentioned the issue we should absolutely make sure that people understand that sexual orientation and gender identity are two completely different things. I would tend to agree, but our history, long before the arrival of the French postmodernists, or even the Frankfurt School of Philosophy with their critical theory, was already in origin. If you take Karl Heinrich Ulrichs, this doctor in the second half of the 19th century, and later Magnus Hirschfeld, the history about the liberation for people who love people of the same sex was from the very beginning intertwined with the idea that gender roles maybe were not fixed, that, Ulrichs even said, he invented this notion of urningus and urningina, basically a man with a female anima that therefore would be attracted by another man. So you can see that it's very difficult to divide this thing. I think the main problem is that we used to be critical vis-a-vis, we used to make fun of gender stereotypical roles in the past. We were perhaps the funniest people on the planet. The problem is when other people arrived and turned everything into a sort of catechism that couldn't be changed. But so I would say, reclaim your liberty, reclaim your individuality, but at some point resist, try if you can, it will come, resist the temptation of becoming a new church. And I say this because we're meeting here. Voila, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, and thank you for trying to continue the conversation from earlier today. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you first.
Yeah, I'm Khizar Abbas, and I'm originally from Pakistan, Lahore. For like my 23 years, I lived in Pakistan, and then I moved to UK. So the concept of LGBTQ, this entire thing in Pakistan is very different. So if you talk to someone in Pakistan, there is no concept. They don't know about L, G, or B. They only know about T, the transgenders, and it goes with the term of hijra in Pakistan. They're basically men who cross-dress, so they're called hijras. The concept of hijra in Pakistan is entirely different from the way it is in West, like in the trans community in West. It doesn't have to be biological, they just cross-dress. And since societal, it's kind of understood that you have to be a woman to like a man. So there's no guidance. So people kind of, when they know about that, they are inclined towards men. They start to feel like that maybe I'm a woman, maybe I need to dress like a woman, maybe I need to put makeup or anything. So that's how things are back home. And when it comes to acceptance, there is no acceptance. In terms of acceptance, there are several things. One is the law. By law, it's like zero tolerance. Like if you're caught doing it, it's carnal punishment, like it's death penalty. And then there is societal punishment. In society as well, there is no acceptance of like even LGB anything. So when you talk to someone about it, they would make fun of you. They would say that it's just a phase, that they'll just marry that guy and it's just a phase and it will go. So this is something, and there's so many factors that contribute to it. One is the patriarchy, then there is religion, and then there's the societal culture as well, like the way society pushes it. Like even I remember when I was growing up in Pakistan, to me as well, there was no guidance, and when you look around, it's all like man marries a woman and then they have kids. That's what it is. And I used to think like maybe I am a woman or something, because when I talk about Pakistan, I talk about someone. I was living in a house with no internet, with no access to outside world. So for me, everything was what was happening in my city, what I was seeing on the street. So for me, I remember like wearing my sister's clothes, and still I wasn't like, I was so confused that what I'm doing, I'm not satisfied. This is not what I want. And then as I grew up, I explored my options, and then I knew that there's a thing as gay. I knew that I was gay, but I didn't know that this term exists. So then I educated myself, and now I am happy that I accepted my identity. So when it comes to acceptance in Pakistan, that like all gender minorities are not accepted, but the tolerance to like LGB sector is zero tolerance. Like if you go to meet someone, you're robbed, you'll have beating, and you can't go to police because that's the way the system works. It's gonna go against you. And whereas when we talk about the transgender people, there is acceptance, but still they are not accepted like a normal person. But still, as even in Islam as well, even in the culture as well, there is a mention of them. So that's why they are tolerated a little bit. But when it comes to the lesbians, gays, and bisexuals, there is no acceptance. Like the families will disown you. If you are from a big city, so there's a chance that they will disown you. If you are from a remote village where there is no law, there is nothing, so there's a chance that they might kill you. They might do anything to you. And there are videos over internet. It's all over like social media. You might have seen it. This happens. So I think the situation in Pakistan is very similar, like to the situation in other countries like Iran. There is no tolerance. There is no concept. People don't even have a concept of like lesbians and gays and bisexual. They say that it's just a phase. They will laugh at you. They'll make fun of you. Even when I told my family about it, it was like my mother. She was like, "Let's get him married. He'll be all right." Yeah, but then and the funny thing is, even people like, I'm sorry I'm taking so much time. I just want to share like how things are in Pakistan. People who are educated, who are meant to have the right exposure, who have exposure to the outside world, they still believe the same things. My mom took me to a doctor who was like a very qualified, very nice doctor in a big hospital in like Lahore. Lahore is a big city like in Pakistan. He was because when he told my family, they thought that there's something medically wrong with me. So she took me to a doctor, and the doctor, I told him that I'm gay. And the doctor, instead of examining me, like, is there medically wrong with me or not? Because that's what my family thought. He started to lecture me on Quran, like the previous nations, they were destroyed for doing this. So this is not acceptable. This is not the culture. It's just a Western influence. And I think you're watching too much Netflix or something like that. So, and I was very, very disappointed because I was kind of hoping to get expert opinion, a medical opinion from him. So this is the situation.
You were exposed to the hijra concept as well in Pakistan. If you want to go into more detail on what connection you may have had to that community at one point.
Definitely. So when in Pakistan, you talk to someone and you say them like I'm gay or bisexual or lesbian, so the general term they use for you is hijra. It's like the most widely kind of accepted term for all the gender minorities. So that's what they think. Like even when I came up to my family, so they thought that so that's why they got me checked to a doctor. They thought that there's something wrong with me. So this is and in terms of the government funding and the funding that we get from other countries in aid of gender empowerment and gender minorities empowerment. So it's always the trans community who gets the funding, because and the government acknowledges this gender. So the government job, there's a special quota for this community. So, and when we talk about the funding, so the funding as well, it goes to the trans community. So there is no evidence of funding going to gay community, going to lesbian community, going to bisexual community. And this is the main reason why the cases in Pakistan, there is in last 2 to 3 years, there is an 85% increase in HIV, because no one like want to spend money to educate, to frequently test the audience, to frequently test the gays and lesbians as well. Because all the funding they goes to the trans community. So this is the main reason why I am here and I want to educate you, is because all the funding, like in Pakistan, if you talk to someone and you say that I'm gay or anyone, they will just think that it's like he's trans. So this is like the widely accepted term in Pakistan. So it's very similar to Bangladesh. Like when you're applying for government jobs, there's a quota for trans community. When you go for your like national identification, so it's accepted, so you can choose your gender. So this is something like in Pakistan, like there is no acceptance of gay, bisexual, and lesbian, but when it comes to trans, like it's kind of accepted and under the level of hijab.
Thank you for sharing that, and just hearing the past three comments and questions. I'm getting a lot of vibes of like Westerners sometimes have a hard time understanding these concepts when they try to study other countries, and I kind of want to end on that note with you, Renato, because that was something that also came up at the end of the last panel, which is that some people wonder like, LGB International, really, what can we really do realistically to help other countries without, like countries in like the global south, without coming across as kind of like ignorant or imperialist or not really knowing what we're doing properly? How do we avoid, repeating the mistakes that maybe some other organizations have? You could speak to that.
I personally don't think that an organization like LGB International should try to influence non-Western countries. I mean, if there are organizations based in the so-called West that contact you and want to become member, by all means, welcome them, do things with them. And if one day you will have the means and the infrastructure to listen to the call of an activist who's actively persecuted in their country by their government because of their activism, if you can, by all means, help them, okay? I'm not saying that you shouldn't do these things. But I would, first of all, recommend to focus on the damages of wokeism in the West. That's already quite a lot of work to do, And also, I would say, in my many years of experience as at the head of ILGA, I came in contact with hundreds of activists in the so-called global Southeast. And I have observed how wary they were of the Western benevolent and wanting to help attitude. Some maybe, understandably, feigned appreciation in order to receive financial assistance, only to secretly resent this kind of one-way relationship later, a relationship based on dependence. It is a human trait to develop resentment towards those who control your means of subsistence, okay? Especially if it means being lectured all the time on how to do things, okay? It is a toxic, unhealthy relationship for both parties. It is a relationship based on structural inequality. I know it sounds woke, but as I said, don't throw the baby with the bathwater. And it is a relationship where one of the partner, is always kept in a state of perennial and artificial infancy, okay? They will always need you, etc., etc. And I became aware during those years, how many activists in the West were oblivious that this was the sentiment developed in their countries towards them, They were well-meaning, probably also trying to, everybody wants to be good, But I think the end result was the opposite. Moreover, none of the countries in Western Europe and North America that developed LGBT movements did so receiving help from abroad, from other countries or other foundations. It was all hard work done during the free time. And to expect that this would not be possible in other countries is a little bit patronizing, okay? Every country is different, but everyone has the ability to build a movement of some kind. I also know that at the same time, many activists in the global south envy our pride parades. I can understand why, of course, even though I wonder if they envy also what some of our pride parades have become. See San Francisco, for instance, or other places where all you see is basically a narcissistic exhibition of all possible sexual fetishes and proclivities. This is exactly the very incarnation of the fears of their societies, okay? They know that if they fear that if they let introduce new rights for gays and lesbians, then this is what will happen, that the whole society will collapse in a sort of madness. Which is why many of these countries nowadays have erected a sort of cordon sanitaire around everything LGBTQ. And someone said it from, I think the friend from Bulgaria, this one, they see it as a package, and I tried to briefly say before also why in part, unfortunately, it is a package, the whole LGBT thing, and T and Q, etc. So it will take a lot of work to undo that kind of damage, but this must be done by the people and the activists of those countries. You could say, I think, in a nutshell, that perhaps the biggest damage to gays and lesbians around the world that was caused by wokeism, especially through its gender ideology lens, was exactly to somehow create a fear and an inability of willing to understand anything from the authorities and the intellectual leadership of those countries, okay? You can reason with some of them for hours about sexual orientation being different by gender identity, but all they see is that drag queen reading stories and bringing children to clinics receiving puberty blockers. They see the Canadian Army putting a new regulation whereby every member of the army can wear the skirt regardless of the gender. They see this, okay? And so I would say at this point, the damage has been done. Let the activists of those countries try to put a remedy to it, and when they will be ready and when they will be willing, they will contact you and try to identify a strategy together.
Thank you. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to get questions from the audience. I'm going to do it a little bit differently than the previous panels. I just want to hear some people state some questions multiple questions from the audience, and then I'll refer them back to the panel.
Can I start? Has the LGB International issued any response to the recent Human Rights Watch report on the human rights violations specifically for LGBT people? Because even the report was kind of criticized by the Humanist Society Singapore. We all rolled our eyes at their report, right? Because it was so alarmist and inaccurate in their reporting. So I'm just wondering if any of the LGBT countries has actually responded to their report.
Okay, is this a specific report?
Yeah, the human rights violation. Because if we don't say something,
yeah. I can actually quickly answer that as someone who is involved in LGB International. Oh, sorry. Okay, so the question was about responding to, has LGB International issued a statement responding to human rights violations?
Human Rights Watch report.
Human Rights Watch report. No, not to Human Rights Watch report. What we have done recently is Senegal recently was passed some laws that stricten their laws against homosexuality, and we had this campaign where we sent letters to the ambassadors to the embassies, the Senegalese embassies in our respective countries to draw attention to that, but not about the human rights report. Thank you for asking about that. Anyone else? Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to know from the panel what they think the relationship of religion is to all this.
Okay.
And I don't mean the obvious, religion codified or lots of religions codify homophobia. I mean a more profound question about religion is the closest to the thought. It has its own closed language. Now we see the woke ideology, which has its own closed language. So it's it's about the evolution of ideologies and how how the zeitgeist is moving in all these different countries.
Okay, I'll bookmark that and then just see if there's anyone else who has questions.
Someone repeat the question in each case.
Okay,
please.
yeah, that was a question about the role of religion and ideology in homophobia. Next,
Yeah,
yes,
I think that self-ID has been sort of growing in Europe in different places. And I think, and maybe panel member can verify, that self-ID has now been rolled back in Spain. I think there was legislation saying that people could self-identify as whatever they wanted, and that now that legislation has been rolled back. And I wondered if that was significant.
No, it hasn't been like that.
It hasn't?
No.
Okay.
It was Portugal. It's Portugal.
Portugal. Thank you.
Okay, I'll note that. I see one other hand back there. Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I just wondered if, bearing in mind Renato's comments about, I guess, paraphrasing now, but allowing other countries that are not traditional in the West to kind of grow their own grassroots LGBT movements and so make decisions for themselves. If we bear in mind the comments that Renato made and the suggestions, I wonder whether the other panel members, what is their view in terms of what would their countries or LGBT people in their countries would actually need from, I suppose, the West, if you will, or from us. In what way could we reasonably contribute to what's going on in their countries?
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions? Okay, there are two more, one gentleman in the back, and then I'll go to you.
Sure. I used to be really active in terms of LGBT rights in this country, and one of the things I used to do is I used to go to countries with worse track records and worse gay rights and go and support those countries via attending prides. But now the world's been poisoned so much by gender ideology, I'm kind of now pulled back from that. And I just wondered whether the panelists had any views on how, we're quite fortunate in this country, but how, if we want to support countries where homosexuality is illegal or, certainly have much less rights, but we don't want to help push gender ideology, can we do anything meaningfully in this country as individuals?
Okay, thank you for that. And then one more for the lady.
I was wondering how the activists in those countries would get themselves organized enough to be heard in those oppressive cultural and government settings that we are hearing. People have to flee the country. It's not just being demoralized, but it's the fear of death. So how can they bring themselves out to express and then engage with international organization in such platforms? And bearing in mind, in most third world countries, internet is an issue. And I was hearing one of the panelists saying they didn't have access. So if I'm coming from a rural setting, I think we're still far away off. I don't know if there are any suggestions of how to broaden and engage at this level. Thank you.
We're not hearing any of this.